Now it's time for another Board Game Brawl preview with Nick Meanahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey people, today we're going to take a look at Vampire Hunters from Dark Gate Games. It is seeking funding on Kickstarter right now. You can go to the official Kickstarter project page by following the link up in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. If you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, you don't have to take my word for it. You can find out for yourself. Now, Vampire Hunters is a fully cooperative game, maybe. It's one of those games where even though most everything is intended to be fully cooperative, there are actually variant rules to allow you to play competitively or also solo as well, and also at times during the game it may become semi-cooperative. And of course that's because this game involves vampires. It's right there in the title. You and the other players are the hunters that are going throughout different scenarios, going through vampire dens, trying to root them out, kill all the monsters, meet certain objectives and secondary objectives in order to win out in the scenario. You can play as a standalone mission, like we're just doing this and that's it, or you can play in a full campaign mode, and this goes for all the different modes of play, but it's just that you might want a more competitive edge. And the semi-cooperative part comes in because, of course, when you're talking about vampires, some hunters might get turned. It's just the way it goes sometimes. There's quite a bit more to it than what I'm describing here, so let me go ahead and give you a brief look at the game with a prototype version. So, of course, I must say that what you see with the prototype version can change in the final version. I had to use my own dice for one of the things, so those dice are not going to be in the final version, of course, but still this should give you a good idea of what the final version will be like. There'll be miniatures and all those different types of fancy things. In any event, we'll come back, we'll talk about it some more.
Vampire Hunters is a fully cooperative game for 1 to 4 players. Players take control of the hunters, going through different scenarios and rooting out vampire threats to meet their goals. It's possible to play the game solo, and you can choose to play as a one-shot session or a campaign. There is even competitive play, which is mostly the same as the cooperative mode, except that you're competing for focus points, which I'll explain more later. The first thing you need to do is set up the scenario. You'll lay out the tiles as indicated, along with tokens for encounters, doors, windows, crates, and stairs. Every scenario has different objectives. For example, in the scenario laid out here, the hunters are invading an abandoned mansion to put a stop to a vampire named Kophis and rescue his 2 captives. Moreover, there are secondary objectives that aren't strictly necessary, but will give the hunters bonuses for completing them. In this instance, the secondary objective would be busting open every window in the mansion in order to let daylight flood in and kill the vampires. Next, every player will decide on their character and take the applicable components. You'll get a dashboard sheet where you keep your character card, as well as basic equipment and any other equipment you gain during the game. Depending on the scenario, you will place start and end markers on different rounds of the round tracker. This sets the time limit for the game, but also note that this track will determine when day changes into night. This cycle is important. Vampires and their minions are more powerful at night and get to act first before the hunters do. During the day, however, they're weak and they start off asleep. Determine which elder vampire you'll be fighting and retrieve their ID card, which in this case, as I said before, is Kophis. Also make sure the regular vampire cards are in reach on their day side to start off with. They'll come out during the game. There are several other decks of cards that, for now, you'll just shuffle and leave within reach. Vampire Hunters is played in phases. We've already talked about the setup phase, but next is the activation phase. This changes dramatically depending on whether it is day or night. During the day phase, players will activate their hunter first and then draw a day activation card for the vampires. At night, this is reversed. A night activation card is drawn first for the vampires, and then the hunter activates. It's important to note as well that each round, the players confer and decide what the turn order will be. It is not fixed for the players. Every turn involves one player activating their hunter and drawing a card for the vampires. Hunters get 3 actions on their turns, and there are several that they can choose from. You can take the same action multiple times as the situation dictates. Moving gives a hunter 2 movement points to spend. 1 point will move you into an adjacent area. Sleeping vampires don't interfere with this, but awake vampires will slow you down and force you to use 2 points to move out of their space. 1 point will also allow you to flip a door token from closed to open. If you go into a new room that has an unflipped encounter token, it now flips, and things will spawn. These might be enemies, spawn tokens, which will pop a little bit later, and ambush you with more enemies, terror event cards, which will either put out more enemies or hurt the hunters directly, or even helpful objects. For example, in this scenario, the encounter tokens randomly have the levers that you need to flip in order to open up the final door leading to Kophis and his captives. Every object is assigned a number, indicating where it is placed in the room in the corresponding area. Also, objects only spawn depending on the color bars, which correspond to the number of players. For instance, with 2 players, you only spawn things that have green bars. Attacking is the other major action hunters can perform. Every type of attack follows the same basic rules. First, you must determine range. Melee attacks require you to be in the same area, but other weapons will hit areas farther away. Also, you must have a clear line of sight for ranged attacks, and can only fire at something one room away through an open door. Every weapon has an attack dice value, which dictates how many d6s you roll, and an accuracy value, which dictates which number you need to roll on the dice to count as a hit. Some weapons have blast effects, hitting multiple targets, and many weapons also create noise, which will wake up sleeping vampires. Vampires have most of these stats as well, together with a finite pool of health, and they'll be dealing damage back to the hunters. Hunters have armor that will block all the hits from a couple of attacks, but when it's gone, they'll start losing health too. If they ever drop down to 0, they become unconscious. Many items are one-time use, and weapons are sometimes fragile, in which case you'll have to roll the fragile die to see if it breaks. But many weapons also have special effects that can be activated by spending focus, which is a resource in the game. Killing vampires will reward you with focus, as well as completing scenarios, and you can also use this focus to learn new abilities between adventures in campaign mode. Furthermore, attacking sleeping vampires is advantageous and allows you to re-roll each die one time before counting hits, though attacking elder vampires is more problematic. Once you declare an attack with a weapon, you must draw and resolve an Elder Influence card, which can interfere with your attack or cancel it altogether. Elders are also not affected by daytime as weaker vampires are. Players can also use actions to search, enabling them to draw a card from the item deck and trade those same items with other players. Actions can also be spent to interact with the environment, like flipping levers or opening crates. Vampires activate when the players draw cards from the day or night activation decks. You'll read and follow every instruction from top to bottom. This may include spawning more vampires and requiring the hunter to make a test, which is rolling a die according to your applicable attribute and hoping to meet the target number. More than likely, you'll also be attacked by vampires in your area with the card. To win the game, you must complete the objectives, and you'll get rewarded with focus or perhaps powerful relics. But any hunter that was knocked unconscious, that is, again, reduced to 0 hit points, will not get this reward. Furthermore, if you can't meet these objectives by the time the final round ends, everyone loses. This is the same in competitive mode as well. There are many optional advanced rules you can use in the game. For example, Pete the Extractor gives the players equipped with harpoons a new action. During the day, Pete can use his wench to drag vampires that have been hit by the harpoons out into the sunlight, automatically killing them. Another optional rule involves the hunters being turned, that is, becoming vampires. This will occur when you reach 0 hit points instead of just becoming unconscious and being removed from the game. You now have different win conditions and strange new compulsions that may involve killing unturned hunters as well as other vampires. At the end of the scenario, they are cured and return to being normal hunters. There's other things going on in Vampire Hunters, but that's a quick look at how to play the game. Now, on to my final thoughts.
Definitely a few things to talk about here. Most people are going to be very happy that this is not a zombie game. While it seems ubiquitous that vampires are in a lot of things, in truth, there are not a lot of vampire-centric games. This is one that is sort of setting itself apart, at least in recent years. Zombies have really been the thing. So to have monsters that act intelligently but are still supposed to be horrifying and stalking you is a nice change of pace. On top of the fact that by the mere virtue that it is vampires, it enables you to have the turning mechanism. Now, of course, you could theoretically do that in a zombie game as well, but then you just turn into some random thing that's going to get killed. In this game, when you get turned, it's not that you're out of the game, that all of a sudden you're a monster underneath the AI's control. No, you're still in the game. You have new objectives. You're going to attack your fellow hunters. You might still attack the vampires as well. You have quirks. I mean, your compulsion actually is going to affect you, but you're still controlling your character. So it's an interesting way to go about that, to not take you out of the game. It actually reminds me of when you turn into an alien in Legendary Encounters Alien. So it's interesting that they have that there. You're still engaged, and it's also very thematic to what's in the game as well. Speaking of the theme, and to stick with the vampire thing, you go into the whole day and night cycle, which is also interesting. And by the way, most of what's going on in this game, in a good way, reminds me of the old White Wolf RPGs, Vampire the Masquerade and Vampire the Requiem, depending on what edition you played, that had a lot of these same, the very traditional vampire tropes. Now, I don't mean tropes in a very negative way here, but you think of like some of the more modern vampire fiction is just like they're basically smart zombies. But in this case, no, I mean, sunlight still affects them, and now you have to plan around that. And the scenario I went over, you bust open windows to let sunlight in. You have to, you can get them when they're sleeping because they're in their torpor, and that's a White Wolf reference. But, there's a lot of different, very thematic vampire elements in the game, and it plays out mechanically as well with the whole day-night cycle, where you can take them out. They might wake up when they're during the day, but they're going to be much, much weaker. But of course, you have a much more limited amount of time to get a hold of them while it's daytime. And the big bads, the elder vampires, are not affected by the daytime cycle at all, so that's another concern. But it's just interesting that they're doing also a modern take on this as opposed to just a fantasy vampire thing. And so you have high-tech weaponry. There's the whole thing where the advanced rule of having the extractor who you can harpoon one of the vampires, then your extractor rips them out through the window, which I just think is very cool and thematic. So there's a lot of different interesting elements going on in the game, but at the same time, it's a solid campaign-style game with very set rules, very easy to get into. There's not a lot of really difficult systems. You'll feel at home with it if you've played other similar type games. At the same time, though, there is enough here to set it apart that it is noteworthy and interesting, especially with those thematic elements. So definitely, if any of these things strike your fancy, if you like vampires, if you like either scenario campaign-based games, cooperative games with a competitive bent to them at times, you definitely want to go ahead and check this out. The Kickstarter is going on right now. You don't have too much time left, so please go to the page. You can follow the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. Those links will take you to the page. You can find out more information than I could possibly tell you here, and hopefully you'll consider backing the project. That is Vampire Hunters from Darkgate Games. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting our sponsors. Take care.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.